This lesson is called Negotiating 101 because we'll be discussing the basic steps you'll want to take when you begin to negotiate. We'll be discussing 3 preliminary steps you take in the negotiation process. They are 1. Decide to negotiate, 2. Prepare to negotiate, and 3. Practice negotiating. Notice that all 3 of these steps are things that you do prior to beginning any important negotiation. As we discussed in the lesson on asking, you have to decide to negotiate. Most people don't because they simply haven't thought to do so. That means until you become accustomed to negotiating, each day you need to ask yourself, what opportunities will I have to negotiate? Once you identify those opportunities, then you need to commit to negotiating. Now that you've decided to negotiate, you need to prepare for that negotiation. Before you even start thinking about your interest and your case, you should spend some time thinking about the other party's case. So, for example, if you're going to be negotiating your starting salary at a new job, you'll want to do some research on the organization where you'll be working. You can do that research by looking at their website, or by looking at their press releases and any articles written about them in the media. You might also talk to people that you know who have worked there, who are currently working there. As you're preparing for your salary negotiation, to the extent possible, you should explore the other party's interests or needs. Some of this you can do during your original interview as you listen to what they have to say about what they have available and what their constraints are. And again, by talking to people who work there or who have worked there, you can begin to find out something about the organization's culture, their interests, and what their needs are. If possible, you also want to explore what the other party's constraints are. That is, what are they not allowed to do? For example, I'm a professor, and universities have different rules about what they can and cannot do in order to hire a faculty member. Thus, some universities offer moving expenses, others say that they cannot do it. Some universities have more salary available, but don't have much space. Some universities may have space and flexibility on schedule, but they may not have very much money, and therefore they're limited in what they can offer in terms of salary. Basically, every organization has things it can do and that it cannot do. It's very helpful to you if you understand what they cannot do. That way you can focus on asking for things that you can get, and you don't spend your time and your capital asking for things that you are never going to get. And finally, you want to explore the other party's negotiation orientation. That is, as you're talking to them, you want to see if you can figure out to what degree do they have a competitive or a collaborative approach. Again, talking to previous employees about their experiences will be very helpful. But you also can simply listen as they talk about the negotiation process to try to understand whether they're going to be more collaborative or principled, or if they're going to try to drive a hard bargain. Overall then, the more research you do on the other party's case, the better prepared you are to develop a winning case for yourself. Let's take another example to explore this process. Let's say that I want to buy a car. How would I go about exploring the other party's case? Well, first of all, I would do some research about the organization and about what I wanted to buy. First, I would go online and find out what the car typically sells for. Then I'd do some research to see how many different dealerships sell that car. In this case, the more dealerships that sell the car, probably the better option I have for negotiating it. I would also look at particular dealerships and see how large they are, how small they are. If a dealership has a lot of inventory, then they're going to be more eager to sell because they're paying interest on that inventory. So I'll do research to find out the number of dealerships, the size of the dealerships, and their inventory. Once I've done that, then I can think about what are the other parties' interests and needs. Well, obviously, their desire is to sell the car for as much as they can. On the other hand, they do want to sell the car. I also happen to know that their interests change over the month. That is, at the beginning of the month, their interest in selling the car is a bit lower than it's going to be at the end of the month. As they come to the end of the month and the salespeople have to report their monthly sales, they become a bit more willing to sell the cars and perhaps a bit more willing to cut into their own profit. At the same time, I need to look at the other party's constraints. Obviously, they need to make money on the car. If I can, what I want to do is determine what they pay for the car and then figure out what I think is a reasonable profit. Then I'll know about what area I need to begin negotiating in. And of course, I need to explore the other party's negotiation orientation. Most car salespeople tend to have a very competitive orientation. Given that I know they're probably going to have a competitive orientation, I'm going to prepare a competitive approach as well. For example, I wanted to buy a 350Z. I did my research and I found the number of dealerships that sold the car. I found out what their prices were for the car, and I found out what they paid for the car. Then what I did is I called each of the 3 dealerships on the phone, and I told each of them that I was buying a car that day, and I would buy the car from the dealership that gave me the best price out the door. That is, I told them I wanted a price that included everything, including tax, title, and license, out the door. Then I told each of them they had an hour to call me back, and whoever called back with the best offer, I was going to buy the car for. Based on that, I got a very good deal. As you'll notice, I did some research, I thought about their interests, I thought about their orientation, and then I developed my case based upon my understanding of what their case might be. Now you're ready to prepare your case. Preparing your case takes 4 steps. First, you develop your best case scenario. Then you create a fallback position. Thirdly, you create a BATNA, and BATNA stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And fourth, you decide on your walkaway point. When you create your best case scenario, you're thinking of all the things you ideally would like to get in the negotiation. Now, these things have to be based in reality. It can't be some imaginary or pie-in-the-sky idea, such as I'd like to start my first job at $1 million a year. It's not going to happen for most of us, so that's not part of your best case scenario. Your best case scenario is the best possibility you can possibly imagine that is real. Let's say you're negotiating for your first job. Your best case scenario might be a starting salary of $50,000, 2 weeks vacation, and matching funds for your retirement account. Next, you'll want to create your fallback position. For your fallback position, you create a scenario that you'll be satisfied with, but which isn't ideal. So the fallback position for your new job negotiation might be $40,000 a year, 1 week's vacation, and still matching funds for your retirement account. Next, you'll want to create your BATNA, or the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. What this means is that you'll be in a better position to negotiate if you have another alternative to the offer that's on the table. So for example, if you already own a car, you're in a better position when you go to buy a new car because you're not forced to buy a car, you have options. Similarly, if you go to negotiate a new job, if you have another job in the wings or you already have a job, you're in a better position than if you don't have employment. The BATNA doesn't have to be another car for a car or another job for a job. It could be something else. Thus, if you're job hunting and you can't get the salary or type of position that you want, you could go to graduate school, and that would be another best alternative to a negotiated agreement. The key thing is you want to look for opportunities to develop a best alternative. You want to have something waiting in the wings so that you don't feel pressure to accept what's on the table if it's not satisfying to you. And this leads us to our final point. You want to have a walkaway point. That is, before you go into any negotiation, you need to decide at what point are you going to walk away from the deal. This is the point at which it's not worth your stay. So for example, if you're negotiating for a job and the potential employer offers you $30,000 a year, no vacation, and no contributions to your retirement account, you might decide that that's a point at which you walk away and you turn down the offer and look for a new one. Before you go into any negotiation, you really need to know your walk-away point. Otherwise, you may find yourself settling for something that later you really regret. You could end up paying too much for a car or working at a job that doesn't even allow you to pay your bills. Neither of these leads to a satisfying outcome. So before you go into negotiation, you want to sit down with pen and paper and you want to develop your best case scenario based upon your research, create a fallback position you'll be satisfied with. Think of any other alternatives that you might turn to so that you don't feel pressured to settle, and finally decide the point at which you're going to walk away from the deal and simply not accept anything. It is essential you follow these 4 steps before you ever even walk into the negotiation. Now we'll discuss how you can present your case. You always want to open with your best case scenario. This doesn't mean that you speak first during the negotiation, but once you do speak, you should open with your best case scenario. It's much easier to negotiate down than it is to negotiate up. Once you've agreed to a position that's lower than what you want, you're going to find it very difficult to move upward. In addition, you want to avoid direct disagreement. If in the case of buying a car, the dealer says to you, "I'm sorry, I just can't sell it to you for that price," you might reply, "Well, this is how much money I have to spend, and this is the car that I want. How can we make that happen?" That puts the ball back in the dealer's court to come up with a solution that meets your parameters. What you don't want to do is to begin to increase your price or lower your expectations for the car. And you also don't want to directly disagree with the person's claim that they can't sell it to you for that. If he says, "I can't sell it to you for that price," don't say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. I know you can because my friend bought one here." Once you begin that kind of direct disagreement, the other person goes on the defensive and they're not going to want to work with you. You also don't want to lie or exaggerate. If you're negotiating for a new job, don't tell them you have another job if you don't really have one. You might be surprised when they say, well, with a great job like that, you should probably go there. Also, don't exaggerate about your previous salary. They probably can find out exactly how much you made, and if you've lied about it or exaggerated it, they're not going to trust you and they're not going to want to hire you. It's very important that you present yourself ethically during the negotiation because your employer will be forming an opinion of you as well as of your negotiation skills. And finally, you want to avoid statements of self-interest. That doesn't mean you can't talk about what you offer or your skills, but what you should not say is things like, well, I have really big student loans, and if I don't get the salary I want, I won't be able to pay them back. Your boss doesn't really care about your school loans. Furthermore, if you say you may have difficulty paying them back, your boss might wonder how responsible you really are. Unfortunately, sometimes when you ask for something or you try to negotiate something, the answer is simply no. You go to your boss and ask for a raise, and the boss says, I'm sorry, I can't at this time. There are no funds available for raises. Or your boss says, I really value your performance, but at this point, you're performing pretty comparably to other people. When someone says no to you, you have to accept it in one sense, but you don't have to live with it forever. The best thing to do is when someone tells you no, ask them what needs to happen in order to turn that no into a yes. For example, some years ago, I asked my dean for a raise, and she said no. I was a little frustrated, but I had read the book Getting to Yes, so I asked her, what do I need to do to qualify for a raise? And she said, well, you're kind of topped out at the associate level, so if you get promoted to full professor, I can give you a raise. I then turned around and said, if I vote for full professor, will you support me? And she said yes. Once she said yes, I then had something even better than a raise. I had her support for going up to full professor, which would lead to a raise, as well as other benefits. So in many ways, I came out with something better than a raise because she said no. But that was only because I asked her how to turn that no into a yes. In addition, if someone says no, set a time to revisit the issue. If your boss says she can't give you a raise right now, ask her at what point she'll be able to discuss the issue, and then schedule a meeting during that time frame. Finally, you can also assess your options. If your boss won't give you a raise, you might look around your organization and see if there are positions that are open for which you qualify and which offer a higher salary. If you do that, you may not only get a better salary, you might get a better job. You also, of course, can assess options outside the organization to see if there are other opportunities for you, or you might figure out that if you go back and get a graduate degree, that will increase your likelihood of getting a raise. So if the answer is no, ask what needs to happen to turn it into a yes. Set a time to visit the issue, and make sure you assess all your options to see what is available to you.